Welcome back to another episode of the FinsFocus podcast. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, you obviously already know. Unfortunately, Tyler cannot join us for today's episode, but he will be back for next time. But there's a lot of stuff to get into, so we don't want to waste too much time, and we'll get right into the Chase Claypool acquisition. Now, we acquired him for a late round pick swap, basically the closest thing for free, essentially, from the Bears after they had traded the 32nd overall pick for him. So on their side of things, definitely not great roster management, asset management in that way. But we get Chase Claypool. Now, this is a player who has been on the Steelers and was a top 50 pick in the draft pretty recently, honestly, and for a good reason. He's 6'3", 240, ran like a 4.4, super athletic, super quick, and that's a guy who Mike McDaniel said, do you want me to say it? Like, he's fast and fits in that mold. But this transaction comes off the back of River Craycraft and Eric Ezukama going on IR and basically going to miss a decent chunk of the season. So they go out and bring in a guy like Chase Claypool. Now, before we get into Chase Claypool, I just wanted to say, just because I feel this way, a lot of people were saying, don't worry about it. We have Robbie Chosen, so he will fill in that role. But I don't think people realize how much of a downgrade Robbie Chosen is compared to River Craycraft, especially in terms of play style. You need your receivers to block in the scheme, as you know, in the 49ers McDaniel schemes. Like, you need your wide receivers to block. And I'll be honest, Robbie Chosen displays poor effort blocking, and he does not he's not a great blocker. I'll leave it at that. So I don't think people realize like how much of a downgrade that is from a guy like River Craycraft, who probably is our best blocking wide receiver. So we go out and we bring in Chase Claypool. Now, he's a guy who has had a ton of issues in terms of effort displayed and stuff like that. So we'll get into that for sure. But the fact that he's 6'3", 240, he's a big guy. I mean, we don't really have another wide receiver over 6 foot right now who's really being used outside of Robbie Chosen. And you'd assume Chase Claypool would take on that role. So this is a fit in terms of carving out a role for him, which Mike McDaniel specifically mentioned in his latest press conference. So I think that's why you go and get a guy essentially for free, because you can carve out a role for him. This team has been lacking a Trent Sherfield big slot for this entire season, and you were hoping, maybe Eric Ezukama could do that, but he's not the thickest guy. He's more slender in terms of we're using him out of the backfield and stuff. Not really like a big slot type of guy. You thought maybe Elijah Higgins in the offseason could fill that role, but unfortunately he got claimed off waivers when we were making roster cuts to cut down to 53. So basically you really had no one for that role. And now you do have a potential option or a candidate to carve out a role for himself, again, like McDaniel said. And the thing with that is we'll see. I'll be completely honest. I'm not the biggest fan of him, even though he's Canadian. So shout out to him. I'm Canadian. You love to see it. But unfortunately, he hasn't showed great effort, and that's just super unfortunate. So he's one of those guys, again, I've said so many times, 6'4", 240. You really want him to be a guy who, one, as a skill set, can be kind of a 50-50 ball guy, but he's not really that. He struggles to do that, and he's more of a guy who you just want to kind of get touches for. That year in Pittsburgh where they gave him goal line touches in a bunch of different ways, he scored a bunch of touchdowns. Unless he kind of gets touches created for him, he's not going to create much separation as a receiver. And his whole thing should be, being a go up and get a guy, but he doesn't even do that quite well. The way that he can get on the field and, carve out that role for himself is by being a blocker. And there's clips of him in college being a blocker and him tweeting about himself. But the issue is, and it seems pretty clear, that there have been effort issues on the field at his most recent spot in Chicago and later in his career in Pittsburgh. But it's one of those things where you're hoping, and this must be what they're hoping for, is that, he can, on a good team like this, on a team that's actually headed for something bigger than himself, that he can really give that effort, because when he's activated and when he's motivated, he can be a blocker. He can definitely be a better blocker than Robbie Chosen. And again, at similar sizes, like that would be huge. he can definitely do that. The only question is, will he be motivated to do that? And you're hoping, because honestly, if it doesn't work out for him here, he might be out of the league or on practice squads. He might be at that point in his career where you're hoping he is motivated, because this might be his last chance, because this is his best option to revive his career that has been slowly dying. So you're hoping that, he can be motivated and active, because when he is and when he's on, he can definitely be an active blocker. He can definitely give you some stuff after the catch. I mean, he's super quick, super athletic. You don't see these type of guys come available too often, but when you do, it's usually because, they're not giving effort and they're not living up to that talent. So that's kind of my thoughts on Chase Claypool. He's a guy who should play super tough, who should be a big blocker, who should give a bunch of effort, and he would be on the team for sure. You probably would never have left Pittsburgh if that was the case, but unfortunately some effort issues and some stuff with his, not even his personality, but just the way, he goes about doing what he does in terms of being a receiver and just going about like what he is in the locker room, all this type of stuff. Like the coaches or the media asked him about his coaching, and if they're using him correctly, he just outright said no, and then they sent him home. So there's definitely some issues there, but you're hoping like on a good team, on the Miami Dolphins, he can, be motivated and play with effort and not be the odd man out in terms of that, and also fit in with the locker room well, because from all accounts, it does seem like this Dolphins team is very close. So you're hoping that this won't change that, and you're hoping that this doesn't cause any issues. Honestly, if it does, you could just see him getting cut in the next, 4 weeks, 3 weeks. Like, this is a guy you're taking a chance on. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You barely gave up any assets for him. Again, it's the closest thing for free, essentially. So that's basically where I'm at with the Chase Claypool acquisition. It's honestly not a bad move. I've been kind of tearing on the guy, but again, if he can be motivated, he can definitely carve out a role for himself. And again, like, he has talent. He was a top 50 pick so recently because of his physical attributes. Man, if you can just get him to put in some effort, he could be a really quality piece for this Dolphins team. And again, fill a role that we've been missing since last year, since Trent Sherfield went to the Buffalo Bills. So that is where we stand on the Chase Claypool acquisition, at least where I stand on it. I know Tyler tweeted that he loves the acquisition just because, you're taking a bet on talent. So go follow him on Twitter. You can see his thoughts. And again, I'm sure we'll get his thoughts on the next episode. Now, next up on the docket, we do have to talk about Terron Armstead, because he is now on IR. He will be missing the next 4 games, which means he will be missing the game for Philadelphia. But he can be, and he is eligible to return for the game in Germany against the Kansas City Chiefs. But our bye week in week 10 is right after that. So maybe he doesn't come back till the bye, because that gives him just that extra break. But he is eligible to return when we go to Germany to take on Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and that singer who I don't know who her name is, because, Travis Kelce put her on the map. So I don't really know what her name is, but those guys in Kansas City, and we'll be taking them on. So hopefully he's back for that game. I'm hoping he is. It seemed like McDaniel said this wasn't, I'm not going to say a precautionary, but he was going to say this is more about the long-term play. And as long as you get Terron Armstead back for the later end of the season, the back end of the season, where the last 5 games are really the big test in terms of the schedule and how tough it is once you get past the Chiefs. And then obviously you want him to be ready for the playoffs. So this just seems like more of a long-term move. And if I'm being completely honest, this move stings a lot less when you have a guy like Kendall Lamb, who, 1, played the first couple of games, and 2, looked pretty solid in that role. This is a guy who came into training camp and pretty much ran away with the swing tackle spot. There was no real competition after the first couple of weeks. He really ran away with it. And this is a quality depth piece on our offensive line. So this stings a lot less. I said it before and I've said it again. Honestly, Connor Williams became our most valuable offensive lineman just because of the positional depth behind him, because Liam Eichenberg just wasn't up to snuff. But it's really nice to see, a guy like Kendall Lamb make this move where Terron Armstead is a top 5, top 3 left tackle in the NFL. It honestly makes it sting a lot less going up. It honestly makes it sting a lot less for this injury. Again, it's not great. You obviously want Terron Armstead to be healthy, but when you have a guy like Kendall Lamb behind him, it really, really does help. With those 2 things out of the way, let's get on to Giants week at home. Wearing the all whites. They just announced that as I'm recording this, which is super nice. I think those jerseys are super clean, but we're taking on the New York Giants. Now, I think it's good that we start on our side of the defense, just because that has been a huge talking point after the Buffalo Bills game and after, what happened in week 1 against the Chargers. So we can get into some big picture stuff because that's where a lot of people are. Obviously, the personnel is not a perfect match for the Vic Fangio type of defense, the Vic Fangio scheme system, whatever you want to call it. The personnel is not an exact fit. We're going from almost polar opposites from, Josh Boyer and Brian Flores, who blitz all the time, who send heat all the time, who use different coaching techniques on the defensive line, who have completely different ideologies in terms of, man-to-man, full blitz type of defense. You're sending extra guys a lot. You're expecting your cornerbacks to play one-on-one, press man, or it's either press man or they were dropping back to the sticks, but press man versus now with Vic Fangio where you're playing, zone match and you're barely blitzing. I mean, Vic Fangio has blitzed a little bit more than I expected, but again, in terms of the larger career of Vic Fangio and what we've seen from him, he likes to rush 4 and that's it, and likes to drop guys back and have linebackers play a role where they're either plugging in the run game or they're dropping back into coverage. He really likes to only rush 4. So you're switching from completely different ideologies, and the defense has definitely struggled to kind of connect with that thus far. Obviously, you've seen the interior defensive line struggled against the run. Obviously, Jalen Phillips hasn't played that much, and the outside linebackers have struggled outside Bradley Chubb for 1 game in New England. Van Ginkel has been pretty good. And then outside Javon Hall and Deshaun Elliott and Xavier Howard, the corners have kind of struggled too, because Xavier Howard has had a pretty solid year, underratedly. He is not going up against wide receiver ones, but he's been honestly great. Like, this has been a great start to the year for Xavier Howard. He's pretty much back to what he was before. Obviously, he won't be what he was in 2020 when he should have won Defensive Player of the Year, but this is a great season from Xavier Howard. You know what you're getting out of Javon Holland. Deshaun Elliott has been awesome when he's been on the field. But outside of those guys, like Justin Bethel, Eli Apple, Cater, obviously recently against the Bills, they've all struggled. So it's definitely been an issue. But I think it's important that we state that it's still early. We're only 4 weeks in, and this is a brand new defense. Again, completely changing your mindset about how you want to play defense. So it's super important that we recognize that, and that, it's super important that you recognize the fact that these guys, like Jalen Phillips alluded to the fact that they don't fully know the defense yet. I mean, you're seeing on the offense what year 2 of the offense looks like after last year. I mean, look how much they've gotten better, even though they were already good last year. Look how much the offense has improved and gone to that next level in year 2 of McDaniel's offense, because it takes some time to kind of get to where you want to be in a completely different system, offensively or defensively. So it's definitely something to keep in mind with this defense, because I'm not going to say they haven't struggled, but this is something that could turn around. But again, without an elite nose tackle in Vic Fangio's scheme, you're always going to kind of struggle against the run, because Vic Fangio is all about stopping the pass and making it harder on the quarterback and just trying to be average against the run and force them outside and force them horizontal. But players have struggled to kind of get behind that philosophy thus far and really understand the defense to the point where you can kind of be elite. They've had a couple good games. I mean, the Broncos game is kind of just a wash. They played good against New England, but they really did get waxed against Los Angeles and Buffalo, but that could be because of their super elite, big-armed quarterbacks. But the thing is, in the AFC, you're going to be facing that a lot. So that's not really a thing where you can be like, oh, it's just for those games, those specific quarterbacks. No, these are guys you're going to be facing in the playoffs. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But going in terms of this game specifically and getting more into the Giants offense versus the Dolphins defense types of things, I think it's important to recognize that Saquon Barkley might play, he might not play, but I don't think that should change too much of what you want to do. I mean, you want to get the lead and you want to force them to pass, because Daniel Jones is not playing great, and after getting 3 years, $40 million, he has struggled this year thus far. Not that his offensive line is helping him in terms of getting the ball out and getting the ball down the field, but Daniel Jones has really struggled in year 2 of the offense without Saquon Barkley. In terms of the running backs, I mean, you're not really scared of Matt Breida, Gary Brightwell, or Eric Gray. That doesn't move you. Their wide receivers are they're just full of slot receivers other than Jalen Hyatt. Then at tight end, they brought in Darren Waller, who they were hoping to kind of, be their number one target and kind of be that big receiver. But he has been underwhelming, at least I would say. And then their offensive line has been pretty bad. I mean, They drafted John Michael Schmitz at center, who was already, he was all right as a rookie, but he's out. Shane Lemieux, their backup center and left guard, is out. And their third string center is on IR. So they're kind of just putting things together at center. Ben Bredeson is Ben Bredeson. Marcus McKeithen is Marcus McKeithen. I mean, those two guys are they are who they are. I mean, they're average. But on the tackles, you have Josh Azudu, who's filling in for Andrew Thomas. Now, Andrew Thomas has like Terron Armstead, a top 5, top 3, top 2 even left tackle in the NFL, but he is out for this game. And that's a huge, that's huge for the Dolphins defense, because that's a guy who can really change the game and can really change the offensive line. But the fact that he's out plays a huge role for this Dolphins pass rush and them getting going. So the fact that it's Josh Azudu instead of Andrew Thomas should be huge for this Dolphins defense. And on the right tackle, you have Evan Neal, who has really, really struggled to become anything at that tackle spot opposite of Josh Azudu and Andrew Thomas. He has really struggled. And this is a offensive line that has, again, with injuries, been stuck together. And even before that, wasn't that great in the first place. So when you think about the defense, obviously you're going to see a lot of what you expect from Vic Fangio in that show, making quarterbacks read post-snap. But you're really hoping that we can get pressure. This is an offensive line, and this is an offense that allowed the Seahawks to get 11 sacks on Monday Night Football. And let me tell you, the Seattle Seahawks were not getting pressure at all before that Giants game. They were bottom 5 in most categories in terms of pass rush. They had literally 0 pass rush, like nothing. And then they come out and put up 11 sacks on the New York Giants. There is no excuse. Zero excuse for this Dolphins defense, and specifically the pass rush, to get at Daniel Jones and force him to make mistakes and force him to throw. I think one thing to keep in mind is Daniel Jones is a very athletic and, capable of running type quarterback. But if he's running, that's okay. Like, that's the type of thing where if you're shutting down the pass game in terms of Daniel Jones and you're shutting down the running backs, whether it's Saquon Barkley or Matt Breida or whoever else it is, if Daniel Jones running is the only way they're going to get success, that's okay, because they're not going to get too far with that. This is a defense that now, because you're not running man-to-man, your corners are, not running away from the quarterback, not even looking at him. I know we struggled against guys like Justin Fields and Lamar Jackson last year in terms of running quarterbacks, but in this completely different defensive scheme, that shouldn't be an issue. But that's okay. I think you're okay with Daniel Jones running for his life, but you should be able to shut down the pass against receivers their best receivers who, Wan'Dale Robinson, probably in my opinion, maybe Darius Slayton or Sterling Shepard based on their whole careers, but you should be able to shut down this passing game and force them to run, and then hopefully you're getting the lead and they can't even run the ball and you're forcing Daniel Jones to make mistakes. But the big point I am trying to make is that this is a game where your pass rush can get back on its horse. Now, we don't know if Jalen Phillips is playing yet. I know he wants to play, but he won't be 100% if he does. I would probably sit him and make sure he gets completely healthy, just because I don't think you need him for this game. So in that case, I would probably sit him based on what we know, but maybe he'll be good to go. We'll see. But this should be a game where Vic Fangio should only have to rush 4 and blitz when he wants to, not when he has to. And he should be able to get pressure. And this should be a game for this defense to kind of get back on track against a struggling Giants offense. If this defensive line and if this pass rush does not put up double-digit sacks, I will be upset. In terms of winning the game, I'll be honest, we should do that relatively easily. I'm not going to count my chickens before they hatch, but this is one of those games where you're really expecting to win. And if you're the team that you think you are, you should be winning this game. But the point I need to get across is if this pass rush does not succeed against this offensive line, we have legitimate issues. This is a game where it should all kind of come together, and hopefully they can explode to kind of, get back to where they were expected to be before the season. But if this pass rush struggles against this sort of offensive line, which probably is one of, if not the worst offensive lines in the league, you have real issues, and it's time to go back to the drawing board in terms of what we think about the guys on this defensive line and at outside linebacker. So that's kind of where I feel our defense should be. Again, you're just kind of forcing Daniel Jones to throw and make mistakes, because when he's throwing into holes and he's not just throwing vertically down the field, he's not great. Again, pretty athletic. Don't want to disrespect him too much, but he's really struggled to start the season. No thanks to his offensive line, or thanks to his offensive line, I should say. But that is basically what you want to do. You want to get pressure on Daniel Jones, force him to make quick reads and not let him have time to sit back there. And again, if you let him have time to sit back there, there's much bigger issues on this defense than we might have anticipated or realized before the season. Getting into the Dolphins offense versus this Giants defense. This is a Giants defense that is young, that has some guys that you are worried about for sure, but there are definitely some places where you can attack them. On their defensive line, they have Dexter Lawrence, who is one of the, again, if not the best nose tackles in the league, because not only is he a nose tackle that does the nose tackle things of taking up blocks and being elite against the run, but he might be one of the only nose tackles in the league right now who can also be a pretty good pass rusher from that position. He's a complete unicorn in terms of being a pass rusher as a nose tackle who's as good as he is as a nose tackle. So that's a guy who you're definitely going to worry about, especially if Connor Williams can't go for this upcoming game tomorrow. You're hoping that, we get Connor Williams back and that can really kind of equal out, because other than the snaps with Connor Williams, his run blocking and pass protection has been awesome. So you're hoping that you have Connor Williams back. But if Liam Eichenberg is in there, it's going to be tough because Tua kind of struggled more than he had because of the Bills' interior pass rush, because of guys like Ed Oliver and Jones on that defensive line, because of them and the interior pass rush that we're getting where Tua can't just step up into the pocket if there's pressure off the edge. That kind of gave him some trouble. Obviously, the Bills' defense is much, much better than this Giants one, but that definitely caused some issues. So you're hoping that Dexter Lawrence can't do that much from that interior position, because that is definitely something to watch out for. They also have Leonard Williams, who is a very, very good player. Not elite or anything like that, but very, very good for them on the defensive line. Back to the linebackers, though, this is a group that you can, attack. It's Bobby Okereke, I should say, not Okiriki. It's just fun to say like that, but Bobby Okereke, he is a guy who fits nicely against the run and has some chops in the passing game. He's honestly a really, really good linebacker, but he's a guy who you can attack in the pass game. And Micah McFadden is a young player who you can definitely attack. They also have Isaiah Simmons, who they traded for in training camp, who is just a super athletic guy, but has yet to kind of put it all together. So he's a guy who you might see against a team like us with all the speed. They might want to get their more athletic guy in Isaiah Simmons on the field, but he's still a guy who has yet to figure it out and is still kind of playing in spurts, so you're hoping you can attack him. But this is a linebacker core where the Dolphins like to attack the middle of the field with those slant wheels and all that type of stuff. This is a linebacking core that you can definitely attack and is a significant step back from Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard in Buffalo. They also have Kayvon Thibodeau, who is on the precipice of breaking out, but he is still very, very solid. Austin Jackson and Kendall Lamb have really, really shown like a lot of improvement. Two of the most improved players from last year. So you're hoping they can take care of a guy like him and Azeez Ojulari. They also have Boogie Basham, but this is an edge rush, and this is a pass rush that is very, very average at best, at least in my opinion. Kayvon Thibodeau is definitely a guy who, again, on the precipice of breaking out into something more, but your offensive line on the edge should play relatively well, and that will be a matchup to watch out for. But that is definitely a place where if you can lock that down and kind of allocate more resources to Dexter Lawrence, that would definitely be what I would do, just because Dexter Lawrence scares me, man. Like, he is a guy who is awesome. But that's pretty much their front seven. And again, I think you have to worry about a guy like Dexter Lawrence. You have to worry about a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau. But outside of that, you can attack the Bobby Okerekes in coverage and Azeez Ojulari and Micah McFadden. Like, these are guys who should be able to attack in the passing game. Same thing goes for their defensive backs. Xavier McKinney, one of the most underrated safeties in the league. He's awesome. He's one of the best players on this Giants team. I mean, I think he's up there with the Andrew Thomases of the world. Probably has fallen off a little bit from a couple years ago from where he was up in that kind of group, because the Giants team has improved kind of all around. But Xavier McKinney is definitely a safety who you want to look out for. Not in terms of he's so elite to the point where you want to stay away from him completely, but he's a guy who is definitely the backbone and the best player on this Giants defense. Now, across from him, they have Jason Pinnock and Dane Belton and Bobby McCain. Shout out to Bobby McCain, Dolphins legend. Loved him in Miami. But opposite of him, they have guys who you're not really worried about at safety. And at corner, they have more young guys, Trey Hawkins and Deontay Banks. And they also have Cordell Flott, who plays in the slot. He's a physical guy. But again, these are all guys outside of Xavier McKinney who you should be able to attack in the pass game. I'm really expecting a big game from the pass game in terms of Dexter Lawrence might play a big role in stopping our rushing game. You're hoping Mostert can have a bounce back because he really struggled against Buffalo. He was turning over the ball, not carrying the ball, protecting it. And then he also just didn't run the ball well. Whereas Devon Achane has really not just carved out a role, but he's become like a 50-50 kind of guy with Mostert. It's becoming more of a committee where Mostert early on in the year, especially against the Patriots in Denver, where he was the guy you're like, okay, it's not close. Raheem Mostert is your starting running back. But after Buffalo, man, Devon Achane is definitely going to get some more touches than you probably would have initially anticipated this early in the season because he's showing contact balance. He's showing vision, which in the draft and coming into the year, he was always a guy who was fast and was great for those explosive plays and using him as kind of, not a gadget player, but, in that kind of realm. But man, he has shown off impressive vision behind this offensive line, and he's shown off some contact balance that he's not just kind of an outside rusher. Like, he can kind of get into it and stay upright when he's running between the tackles as well. Not that we're asking him to do that, but because of Dexter Lawrence, I could definitely see us going to the pass game early, Tua having a big game, because there's so many things to attack on this Giants defense. Again, especially in their back eight, outside of Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. I mean, again, those linebackers you can attack in the middle of the field, and those cornerbacks are guys who you can attack in the passing game. It's not something that you're going to be scared of, and it's probably the worst defensive backs you've played all year. Because you had the Chargers, Broncos, Patriots, and Bills. This is definitely the worst defensive back group that you've played. So really expecting a big game from Tua, a big game from Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And then you're hoping that once we get the running game can start to do their work and Raheem Mostert can kind of have a bounce back game on offense. With that being said, though, let me give you some guys to look out for. Obviously, if Saquon Barkley is healthy, that is a guy who you want to look out for. At the receiver position, I was a huge fan of Wan'Dale Robinson coming out of the draft. He has been hurt a lot, but just recently he's gotten healthy and he's starting getting touches designed for him, and he's starting to be targeted a lot more. This is a player you want to watch out for. He's super shifty and a guy who is kind of reminiscent of Kadarius Toney in terms of skill set, but I think is a better catcher of the ball. But that is a guy who I think you're going to want to watch out for in the slot, especially if it's a guy like Justin Bethel who's covering him, because the Dolphins have tried a bunch of different things. They had moved Cater back inside later in that Bills game, but I think especially if it's a guy like Justin Bethel on the inside, you really want to watch out for that matchup because I think Wan'Dale Robinson can take advantage there. So that's a guy to watch out for. Darren Waller, I'm not too worried about. And then again, that whole offensive line is something to look out for because I cannot stress it enough that this pass rush should have a huge, huge game. And if they don't, that really makes you have to go back to the drawing board and really has to make you take a long internal look in the mirror and say, what is this defensive line actually? On the defense, like I said, Dexter Lawrence, that's a guy who you need to look out for. Same thing with Kayvon Thibodeau on the edge. Again, Bobby Okereke is a guy who can really fit the run nicely. So I'm, again, expecting a bigger game from the passing game than the running game. And then Xavier McKinney on that in that defensive back group as well. Cordell Flott, again, just a guy who I want to mention in the slot. He's very physical and he's a good tackler, but that's a guy who I think you can take advantage of. So if you want to move Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill into the slot a little bit more, I can definitely foresee that being at play. But those are the guys and kind of the key players I would be looking out for in this game. And in terms of the Dolphins offense, again, like I said, Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, this should be a big game for them. You're hoping to see Kendall Lamb continue to be what he has been thus far, which is super solid at left tackle, replacing Terron Armstead. Then on the defense, if Jalen Phillips plays, you're really hoping for a kind of almost breakout game from him. Like if you get a 2-sack, 3-sack game from him, if he plays, that would be awesome against a Giants offensive line that's essentially been taped together. So that's something that you're definitely hoping for. And then you're hoping Deshaun Elliott's back at safety because Brandon Jones really struggled and had his worst game as a professional in Buffalo. He clearly looked like a guy who, one, hadn't practiced, but two, did not really know what he was doing in terms of, learning and knowing the Vic Fangio scheme. He was taking bad angles and missing tackles and, missing communications and all that type of stuff. So with Deshaun Elliott hopefully back for this game, you're hoping for more stuff from him. But outside of that, I'm not too worried about this Giants game, if I'm being completely honest. If this team is where we expect them to be and and play the way we expect them to play, this should be a game that is over pretty quick, and you're hoping for that. This is not really a trap game, but this is a team that you don't want to take lightly. I'm not going to say that, and I'm not, advocating for that, but I'm just saying if this team is a Super Bowl contender like we all think they are and can be, they should not lose a game at home to this specific New York Giants team. If this game is close, you, again, want to look at the drawing board and kind of say what went wrong here, because this should be a team that you pretty much blow out. And in that sort of mindset, let's talk a little bit about the bigger AFC picture, more just about the Dolphins picture. The Dolphins are 3-1, and I know there's a lot being talked about as they're 3-0, and then a lot of people are now having their doubts about them after the Buffalo game. And kind of like the Fangio defense, I think it's important to state that, this is very early on, and we're 3-1, where a lot of people kind of expected you to be 2-2 outside of that stretch, and maybe not everyone. But for the most part, you're 3-1 coming out of your first 4 games, which are super tough. Having, a game in Buffalo, having a game in New England, like these are games that are tough, and you got them out of the way. Now, obviously, you lost that one to Buffalo, but the fact that you're 3-1 coming out of a stretch like that, playing Justin Herbert and the Los Angeles Chargers, that is a pretty positive place to be, as bad as that Buffalo Bills loss was. And you're sitting at 3-1, and now you have, the New York Giants at home, which you should win, and then you're taking on Carolina, who basically has shown nothing. I mean, Bryce Young could be back for that game. It's Andy Dalton, and they don't really have receivers outside of Jonathan Mingo and Adam Thielen. I mean, that's a team, speaking of things that are taped together, that's a whole team that's kind of been taped together for this year. You should really come out of this stretch 5-1, heading, to play Philadelphia. So this game specifically is important. Go to 4-1, kind of show where you are, get back on track. This is a great game to, at home, get back on track after, a poor effort against Buffalo. Go beat Carolina, go 5-1, and then see, you have another litmus test against one of the better teams in the NFL in Philadelphia. So that's kind of where I'm at in terms of what the kind of whole outlook and general outlook on the season is right now. You really want to take care of business against these next 2 teams. Going to Philadelphia 5-1. Then you have New England and Kansas City. You got to beat New England at home. That just has to happen. And hopefully you're either 7-1 or 6-2 heading into Kansas City, depending on whether you drop that Eagles game. And again, that's another litmus test. For me, and this is a big part of that Bills game, games like this against the Giants are games that, in terms of the greater outlook of the season, don't matter as much, because I don't doubt whether this team can beat bad teams at all. I don't doubt whether we can go 10-7, 9-8. We've done that for the past 3 years. We have been a winning team. Now it's about whether we can do it when it matters, and if we can do it in the playoffs, which means I'm looking out for games that, really test this team and show some adversity and see what they have against the best of the NFL, because that's what you're playing, in the playoffs. And to me, you got to get through these teams, but you have a litmus test we had one against Buffalo, you have one against Philadelphia, you have one against Kansas City, and then you have 2 more at the end of the season against Dallas and against Buffalo at home. Those are all games against the best of the best in the NFL. You have the Ravens too, who are kind of figuring themselves out, and we'll see what happens to them later in the season. They've been a team who have historically, gone injured and played a lot worse at the end of the year. So we'll kind of see on them. I'm not going to say they're the best of the NFL, but against Buffalo and against the teams I just mentioned, those are the litmus test games. And unfortunately, you failed your first test in Buffalo. That would have been a game that would have been so nice to win and really put you on track to win the AFC, if not the AFC East. But you have 4-5 more games against teams like Buffalo, like Kansas City, like the Eagles, these litmus test teams that you can really show where you are and show where you belong in the AFC, because right now it's kind of Kansas City and Buffalo. The Bengals have kind of fallen off, but you failed your first test, and obviously it's not great, but that's okay. But now, to me, it depends on what are you going to show against the Eagles and the Chiefs, and obviously later in the season, like I said, all these teams that are your litmus tests. So that's what I'm seeing. I don't want to underplay or downplay the effect of, or the way we lost to Buffalo. It was embarrassing, and again, you failed your first test. But you can get back on track with the Giants here and then go on to your next litmus test games and hopefully show a better effort and show that you belong in the AFC and in the playoff picture and honestly in the Super Bowl picture, which is where we all want to be. But that is going to wrap up today's podcast. We're sorry it's late. Again, Tyler will be back next week, but thank you so much for listening, watching, subscribing, following, and everything like that. Go Fins up, and hopefully, we can win this game. So thank you so much.